What's up, Game Devs? T-Chan here, and welcome to episode 29 of Game Dev Loadout, where I chat with today's most experienced game developers 7 days a week. We will learn about their background, the challenges they faced, and the tools they use to reach success. And today's featured guest is Cortney Harding. Cortney, it is go time. Are you ready?
I am, yeah.
Yes, she is a professor, author, consultant working at the intersection of music and VR, virtual reality. She is the founder of Friends With Holograms that help brands and agencies understand the VR space and to create an amazing experience. So go ahead, Cortney, give us a bit about your personal life and how you help combine music and VR together.
Okay, sure. Well, thanks for having me. So, yeah, I got into VR about 2.5 years ago. I had worked in the music tech space for several years. I was working at different music tech startups, consulting and doing business development. And I saw a VR experience at an art museum that was a music and VR experience, and it really blew my mind. I walked out of the experience and got on the subway to go home, and I just remember thinking, like, I have to do this. I have to get into this somehow. So I was still working at the time for a music startup, and I finished my contract with them, and then I started really looking into VR, digging into VR, writing about it, thinking about it, learning about it. And so last year, South by Southwest, so South by 2016, I was on a panel on VR with some amazing people who I wound up working with. So I started working with a company called Moth and Flame VR. I did business development and partnerships for them for about a year. And they're an amazing organization and really fantastic people. But the challenge that we kept running into was we would go meet with an agency or a brand or a record label or, anyone we wanted to meet with. And we'd get in a room. And the first thing I always ask is, okay, who's done VR before? And, maybe 2 people raise their hands. And of that, half of them, it's like the Google Cardboard that they got with their newspaper. So they had not a lot of experience. Not a lot of people have experience with VR. And I think in the sort of game world and the VR world, we tend to forget that most people aren't nearly as into this as we are. So I wrapped up with Moth and Flame, and I started Friends With Holograms. And Friends With Holograms has 2 parts. So the first part is the education part. So we have a class called VR 101, which is a really simple, non-technical introduction to VR. It's meant for people that are on the advertising side or the brand side or the entertainment side, and I help them figure out what VR is. I do a lot of demos. It's very hands-on. I have 2 other classes that I'm offering in the fall. VR 201, which is the fundamentals of storytelling, and I'm working with several director partners on that. And VR 301, which is emerging technologies in virtual reality, and I have several technology partners on that. The other side of the agency is your standard sort of agency. It's consulting. It's helping figure out the creative. It's helping figure out who the partner should be. It's managing the requests for proposals. It's really kind of just managing the projects and making sure that at the end of the day, whoever the consumer is gets a great VR experience. So that's the agency. I do a couple other things. I do some consulting for a cryptocurrency startup that's working in the music space. It's still pretty much in stealth mode, but should be rolling out later this summer, which I'm very excited about. And I still write for a little bit for Upload and for a site called TV Rev. I actually have my own podcast that just launched. It's the Friends With Holograms podcast. I talk to interesting directors that are doing great work and share that. And then I teach at NYU. I'm not teaching this summer, but I start teaching again in the fall. And I teach a writing about popular music class because that was my background before I did all the startup stuff. But even that class, I try to broaden the focus to be about storytelling. And we talk a lot about virtual reality, videos, and different forms of multimedia storytelling. So that's what I do.
Holy moly. Let's break it down. You got a ton of experience. What do you consider your main area of expertise?
Oh, I don't really know that I have one. I mean, I know a fair amount about VR, but I think that's partially at least a function of VR being so new. So I've met a lot of people in the VR space that say that they are, they've been in VR forever, and that means like a year or 2. Now, there certainly are a group of people that have been in VR for several years, and there's even some people that are sort of the diehards that were in VR the first time around in the early 90s. But I mean, I do a fair amount in VR. Definitely, I know probably way too much than it's healthy for any human being to know about the music business and music technology. But yeah, I mean, it's fun for me because if I just did one thing all day, I'd get bored very quickly. I like to be able to hop around and do a lot of different things, and everything that I work on pretty much feeds into other things that I work on. So I'm really focused on, edge case and emerging technologies, both with VR and cryptocurrency. And there's a lot of people that work in both spaces, so it's kind of easy to go back and forth between the two. And then a lot of the writing and the teaching I do tends to focus on analyzing those spaces and learning about those spaces.
Yeah, so everything's connected. I see what you mean. And what is something we probably don't know about music and VR that we probably should?
There haven't been a lot of really good music VR videos yet. So I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is the music business, they don't have a lot of money. I mean, whether that's they sort of plead poverty or whether they actually don't have the budgets, that's a little bit up for question. But it is hard to get the budgets to make really good music VR content. That's not to say that it doesn't exist, but it's limited. It's also very hard because people have a hard time thinking outside the traditions of what a music video can be or what a VR concert experience can be. So I've seen a lot of VR concert experiences where they just kind of stick a 360 camera at the front of the stage and call it a day, and that's actually not very interesting to me personally. I find that it's very, very hard to replicate a live concert experience in VR. I spent a lot of time thinking about live streaming concerts and why that kind of never really took off. Certainly, some of the big festivals people will stream, and occasionally there will be a big sort of event concert that people will watch live. But generally, people go to a show because they want a live experience. They want to be there in person. So it's very hard to replicate that in VR. I don't see that happening anytime very soon, although who knows what happens a few years down the road. In terms of music videos, I feel like people get stuck in a couple tropes. So there's a lot of these like trippy, psychedelic, fun videos. And some of these are great. Like there's a couple that I really like. The Kygo experience is good. It's very sort of trippy and strange. Tyler Hurd, who's a director, has done a couple experiences that are, again, like they're trippy, they're strange, they're fun. They're great. I don't know how far they push the bounds of the medium. Although I do enjoy them a lot. So what I want to see out of music is a lot more thinking of how do we create something new rather than how do we make a music video and just make it in 360. So one thing that I really want to see is sort of like conversations with artists or using the medium to connect very deeply with artists, whether that's them sort of explaining their creative process to you, whether that's them showing you things or you actually conversing with them. That's where I think it can get really interesting with music. I don't know that just like sticking a GoPro at a concert is where we're going to end up. Like, I feel like that's kind of a fun starting point, and if you want to experiment with that, great. But I feel like in music, there's a lot of uncharted territory we can get into, and we're right at the start.
And if people want to get into VR or want to learn more about it, like what can they use, or what do you suggest they use to teach themselves so they can like be ready? Because VR is growing, and it's hard to tell when it might be hit mainstream, but it is growing, and I think it's an amazing technology. So what do you think people can use to teach themselves to be ready for it?
So I'm not a game developer. I mean, I'll just be super upfront about that. Like, I spoke at VRDC, and I've spoken at some other developer events, but I'm like very, very much not a developer. Mm-hmm. So, that being said, I mean, there are a lot of really good resources if you do want to learn to develop for VR. I know that Upload has courses. I'm not going to say positively or negatively anything about Upload because a lot of other stuff has gone on, but they do have classes, so that's one resource you can consider. VR Playhouse in LA, if you're based in LA, they have a lot of classes. They're starting this summer, so there's some cool classes there. There are a fair amount of resources for learning VR development. I know that the folks at Unity have some programs, and there's a lot of stuff out there. I think the other great thing to do is to just get a camera and start shooting. YouTube is going to launch a 180 camera later this year. I just wrote about that today, actually. So I would say, depending on the price point of that, right? If it's something that's very accessible, I would, get one of those and just go out and start making stuff. I tend to be very critical of professional VR, but very forgiving when it comes to amateur VR. So I've seen some VR pieces that are like really bad and cost a lot of money, and that makes me crazy. But if you just want to like get a GoPro and go run around and like teach yourself how to stitch, that's awesome. I think everyone should do that. And that's something that I, really want to spend more time doing, especially this summer. And I'm not a director, but I do want to just borrow cameras from people and just go play with them and shoot stuff and see what I can make. And I'm sure it's going to be terrible, and I'm sure I'm not going to show it to anyone, or maybe I'll show it to some friends, but it's just kind of good to get your hands dirty. I feel like in VR, again, because it's so new, the barrier to entry is pretty low. So you can take what you've learned maybe working in a different industry or working on different projects and apply that to VR. And it's not super hard because there's not a super, super established hierarchy of people in the space quite yet. So I do feel like, again, VR, it's not easy. And it can be time consuming and it can be expensive, but I also feel like there's a lot of openness in the space, and people get generally very excited when you have someone that's enthusiastic and willing to learn. I have a good story that I'll share. So I had a student at NYU last semester who, he was a music student and he really liked VR and wanted to learn more about VR and sort of specific use cases for music in VR, but he just was like, I want to work in VR. I don't care what it is. So I hooked him up with the VR arcade that just opened up in New York, VR World, which if you are in the New York area, I would highly recommend. It's a really, really cool space. He's been there about a month and a half, and I got an email from him that he's like, oh, hey, I'm running all of our like content programs now. So, let's do stuff. And it's a college kid who just started. So if you're willing to work really hard and put the time in and the effort in, you can get a lot done in VR.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because you say VR is still fairly new and it can be very expensive and time consuming. Do you have like a really difficult moment when you were doing VR yourself? Like, do you have like an obstacle or like a big challenge you have to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky when you are working with a VR agency or working with a VR production company, as I have done in the past. As is the case with any agency, it's a lot easier to sort of promise things than it is to actually make things happen. So I've had instances where, people have been very interested and then the contract falls apart at the last minute, or the funding doesn't come through, or the brand decides like, oh no, instead of doing this thing we've been working on for months, we want to do this entirely different thing. And that is common among a lot of industries. That's very common just in the advertising and branding world in general. It's not specific or new to VR, but because a lot of VR companies are still very small and operate on very, very thin margins, it can be very difficult if you've had something sort of in the works and you've planned it, and then it, for whatever reason, the brand's like, oh no, you know what, we're going to do something else. So yeah, it's definitely tricky, and I think that that's only going to get better with time. As more content gets built, as more people come into the space, as people get excited, then people will start taking VR a little bit more seriously and really committing to building great pieces. I think where we're at now, and this is an analogy that I've used a couple times, so if you go to a grocery store on a Sunday night and it's really busy, the thing that I run into a lot and drives me crazy is like everyone's just milling around the deli counter and they're just kind of like, oh, who's going to go? No one wants to go first. No one wants to step up. It's this weird passive aggressive thing. No one wants to step up and be like, okay, I want this. And that person is actually usually me, where I'm just like, whatever, I'm just ordering. I don't care. And I get my food and I leave. So where we're at right now is this stage in VR where a lot of people are interested and they're like, oh, VR is really cool, but we don't know. And maybe we'll do it and we'll da-da-da. And, at a certain point, a couple people are going to step forward and just be the like obnoxious New Yorkers who are just like, yo, this is what I want. VR piece, let's do it. Done. They're going to have like incredible results. They're going to get incredible press. They're going to win some great awards. And then the floodgates will open because no one wants to be first, but everyone wants to be second. And one of the coolest things about VR right now is if you are willing to be first, you have a unique opportunity to really change people's minds. So, my first VR experience was a music experience. I still talk about it. I think it was incredible. I don't even know from a technical perspective that it actually was that great if I look back at it, because it was fairly early too, but it blew my mind. It changed my life. And one of my former colleagues, his first experience was one that Volvo did. And it was, again, pretty simple, a couple of years old. You could look through the sunroof and you were in the car, and he loves that experience. And it was an experience that was groundbreaking for him. And he talks about it all the time. And he's talking about how great this Volvo experience was, using the name of the company and talking to, affluent, educated, creative people who are Volvo's core customers. And you can't buy that type of exposure and word of mouth and excitement. That's impossible. So, I put people in the headset all day long. I have an Oculus Rift. I have a Gear. I have a number of other simpler headsets. And I plop those things on people's head if they come into my line of sight, and people have their minds blown. I am so excited when I see someone take off the headset and you can see the gears churning. And another good story is, so my parents are in their early 70s, and they're not technical people. And when I say they're not technical people, they're really not technical people. I had to teach them how to text. It's not oh, they don't know how to use the Snapchat filter. Oh no. Turning their phone on is a big deal. So I was home recently visiting, and I took my Rift with me because I had some work to do. And I put my parents in the headset. And I thought, okay, they'll humor me, right? They'll tolerate this. They'll be nice. They'll take the headset off and be like, oh, that was so neat. You're doing such interesting work. It's a parents thing. Well, so I put them in the headset, and they both were really positive about it. And I was like, oh, cool. This is nice of them. So I woke up the next day, and my father and I went for a little run around our neighborhood. And my father pitched me an experience that he had come up with on his own that was actually great. That had all these interesting technical components, and he didn't know the terms, right? He didn't know the term haptic, but he knew how to describe it. And, he was basically, doing biz dev for me, calling up his friends who work in this industry and saying oh, you have to build this. And I think that's kind of the transformative power of showing people VR, is they get very excited and very creative when they see it. They start immediately thinking, well, how can I build this experience into other parts of my life? And, that's fundamentally the opportunity for me, is getting people really excited, because in a few years, this won't be new anymore, right? In a few years, this will just be kind of like Snapchat or Twitter or any other medium that everyone is on. And you can still do great campaigns on both those platforms. And people still make really great TV ads, but it's not going to be new. So you're going to have to make it even better, right? You can be experimental in VR right now and still do something amazing and still do something brand new.
Try Oculus Rift, or try a PlayStation VR, or even the Google Box or Google Gearbox, I believe it's called.
So there's a couple. So there's Google Cardboard, which is the very affordable. That's basically the free headset that you get with your New York Times, or a lot of people give them away. They have branded Google Cardboards, which are, as far as headsets go, they're free. They're very inexpensive. So you get what you pay for, but they are a great intro step. And I would encourage folks, if they, can get a hold of some, give them to people. I always have a couple in my bag at any given time, because I'm a crazy person. And I just hand those out. They're fun, and,
they're definitely
around the house. The Google Daydream headset is also quite good if you want to slightly, better quality headset. I would say the Daydream right now only works with a Pixel phone, but I think later this summer or early this fall, it's going to start working with Android phones as well. So that opens up a whole new market for them. It's a very comfortable headset. It has a controller. It is, 3 degrees of freedom. But yeah, it's a great product. The Gear VR headset, another great product if you have a Samsung phone. They're maybe $100 new in the store. They're $50 on Amazon, on eBay, for a, pretty good condition one. For that small amount of money, it's pretty worth it to just have one around. And then, there's also a bunch of others. There's Merge, which is meant for children, but it works pretty well for adults too. It's phone agnostic. They're great. I really like them. I think they're doing some cool stuff. Certainly there's a bunch of like knockoff Chinese headsets that you can get on
Yeah.
Amazon. You know, you get what you pay for, but you know, if you want a $40 headset just to have a headset to play with, I mean, yeah, it could be worse. And then of course you jump way up to the Rift or the Vive or PlayStation VR. You know, I have a Rift. I like my Rift. I like the Vive as well. I've used the Vive quite a bit. The Rift, I think, is easier for travel. And that's just for me personally. Like I take my Rift all over the country. I flew back from the West Coast last night with it, and yeah, it's easy to travel with and it's easy to set up. The Vive is excellent, but the setup is more difficult. It is what it is.
Now, from your perspective, since you're not a game developer, what do you think VR or how VR is going to take gaming to the next level?
So I think there's a couple things. I think that the level of interactivity and immersion is going to just be so much more than it is right now. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not a gamer. But you know, I have friends that are. I've had roommates who are, and you know, they've tried to convince me that it's fun, and I'm just a novice at it, so I don't maybe learn that quickly. But you know, there's still a separation, and I feel like once you get into these like first-person shooter games, especially, you know, you feel like you're really part of the action. And the more social VR grows, the more you can like play with your friends and really feel like you are all in the experience together. I think VR also has great applications for more casual gaming. So we saw that a little bit with a lot of the like Facebook games or these like cell phone games, the, you know, Fruit Ninja and Angry Birds and all that. You know, I think VR will probably start with the very serious gamers, the PlayStation VR, but you know, it's not out of the question in a couple of years that, you know, very average consumers will have some version of Fruit Ninja in VR. I think that actually does exist. That they'll sort of, you know, pop the headset on for a 10-minute break at work every so often. So, you know, the headsets are going to get lighter, faster, cheaper. There are going to be wireless 6 Degrees of Freedom headsets later this year, I think, or early next year. So that's going to be really cool. And yeah, I mean, I think again, the level of immersion is, you know, it's a little worrisome when you're talking about very intense games. You know, I think that's something people are just going to have to watch themselves with. But, you know, most 99.9% of gamers are just responsible people who like to game just for fun or relaxation, and they'll be fine. And, you know, as long as people are managing their gaming well, I think it's going to be great.
I think wireless VR is the one I'm waiting for until I actually buy one, because I like that freedom to move around. I just do not like the cord. It always gets in my way. I always tripped over it or something like that. So I can't wait. I can't believe you said that wireless VR might come out next year. I didn't expect it to be so soon.
I think it's going to be, I've heard later this year and I've heard next year. I mean, you know, it's, take everything with a grain of salt. I mean, yeah. Startup time and regular time are often a little bit different, but it's going to come soon for sure. And, you know, we'll see if someone can build a really great headset that works wirelessly. And if they can, then that's going to be massive, because you're right. The cords are a pain. I mean, I've spent a lot of my life, you know, making sure people don't trip over the cords, or, you know, just kind of making sure people don't walk into walls. And there are still, you know, significant enough design flaws with some of these pieces of equipment because they're so new. I mean, that's the thing. The thing that I always come back to is VR is new, right? It's like if you look at, you know, cell phones, or I don't even know, like before cell phones, back in like the Palm Pilot days, you know, I had a Palm Pilot in the year 2000. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And, you know, of course, everything moved forward from the Palm Pilot. And VR is at that stage, or, you know, laptops that weighed 15 pounds and were clunky and only did word processing. You know, that's the stage we're at in VR. So it stands to reason that this technology is going to get better. It's going to change. It's going to morph. It's not even about like headsets or VR or AR or MR or XR or whatever stupid alphabet soup people want to come up with. It's about immersive storytelling and immersive experiences. And, you know, the the hardware and the technology that we use to tell those immersive interactive stories is going to change, but the new wave of like immersive interactive storytelling, like that's going to be here to stay.
Oh yeah. Have you actually tried playing or watching a scary thing through VR before?
I have actually. So, Moth and Flame, who I used to work for, and if I would encourage everyone to check them out. They're awesome people. So we did something for Teen Wolf, the TV show on MTV, last summer at Comic-Con. And those experiences are online right now. You can go watch them you can watch them on YouTube or Facebook or in your Gear or whatever. And they're in the Oculus store, so go get those. But it was a scene where we had two different experiences, but they were very similar in setup. And you were in a space, and the characters were in front of you from the TV show, and they were all telling you, like, don't look, like, pay attention to us, don't look, don't lose focus. But out of the corner of your eye, you could kind of see something, and it was, I'll spoil this because it's, sorry. It was this monster. They were using this to introduce a new monster in the season of Teen Wolf. And so you had this sort of struggle between, like, well, do I pay attention to the character or do I look at this monster? And, it wasn't terrifying, and I've seen this experience like 100 times now. So it's definitely not that scary anymore. But yeah, it's a cool, spooky experience. So I did that. Another Moth and Flame piece was called Remember, Remember. It premiered at VRLA last year. It was a partnership with AMD, the GPU manufacturer. And it also just showed at Tribeca a couple months ago. So really successful piece. And it was about an alien invasion. And some of it was more sort of like psychological horror, because the whole point of the piece was like people were telling you your memories weren't real, and sort of what is real and what potentially isn't, what are, false memories. But there's aliens, so it's also kind of scary. And there's a scene at the end, and again, I'll spoil this. Please watch it anyway, it's great. But there's a scene at the end where the alien comes up behind you, and then it kind of cuts to black. Or the alien comes up behind another character that you were interacting with, I should say, to be more accurate, and cuts to black. So what I did a few times, which I don't recommend, is I would jump on people as the alien was coming up behind the other character.
That's messed up.
I only did it to my friends. I only did it to people who could handle it. But yeah, don't do that. But I do think in horror and in VR in general, there's a lot of opportunity for sort of creating experiences that are both real world and virtual world together. So I've seen a lot of cool VR that incorporates like sense. I'm working on a really cool piece right now for the arcade that incorporates sense. I can't say tons about it because it's still being built, but it's going to be incredible. Tree, which also showed at Tribeca, incorporates sense in a really neat way. A lot of touch. So there was another piece at Tribeca that was really emotional and moving. And at one point, someone came and gave you a hug while you were in the headset. You signed a consent form before, so it was all above board and you kind of knew it was coming, but it was still really interesting. Or I've done experiences where I've had the headset on and someone, just sort of taps me or touches me, and it doesn't have to be anything like seductive. It can just be like someone grabs your hand during a part of it, or someone, touches your arm or something, and that's pretty interesting. I'm definitely really into, just like touch in VR and sense in VR. There's now VR where you can talk to people, ask them questions, and they'll answer you. It's still pretty scripted at this stage, but I think that's going to, as artificial intelligence gets better, like that's going to change a lot. And then there's some like really fun ones. So there's an experience that I really like. Liquor company who's worked with this bar in London. They, you go in, you order this drink. It's this like fancy, super fancy cocktail, a specialty. And then you order the drink, you put a headset on, you watch this like little 2-minute experience, and you can see that you can smell the drink being made in front of you, and they're putting in all these like ingredients. And then you finish the experience, you take the headset off, and your drink is right there. So like, that's cool to me. Like, I think that's clever, it's interesting, it's fun. I'm trying to think what else. Like a lot of the haptic stuff I think is really in its infancy, and I think that's going to be really fun as that develops. I love Subpack. I've used Subpack a bunch. I'll shout out Subpack. They fit all of their Subpack vests on women, so that's great. It's rare. Love them. I've worked with companies that have like built their own haptics, which is really cool, and I've used like the haptic chairs for like car racing, which is really cool. So I feel like there's just a ton of cool stuff that people are starting to do in VR that incorporates other senses, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, it's all this talk about VR just makes me more excited of what's to come. I mean, I didn't even think about like touch VR or smell VR and all these other haptic VR. I didn't actually even think about that. All I thought about was, being transported to another world and then having that there's like a machine where you can actually move within a game. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what that machine is called, but it's like you can like run in a game or walk on some type of machine, and it translates into the VR space where you can walk inside the world as well.
So if you're using a room scale VR experience, then yeah, you're being tracked. So yeah, that's really cool. I definitely love experiences where like if you walk, you can walk in the experience, or if you like crouch or do something, it's in the experience as well. I would not. So I've done biking, like exercise biking with the VR headset on. I haven't been super into that just because I feel like it's a little bit boring the way a lot of people spin that out. So it's like, oh, I'm on an exercise bike, but I'm watching the Tour de France. But okay, that's cool for a few minutes. And then you're like, oh, but I'm really not Lance Armstrong or whoever, it's just like, it's hard to break out of the mindset that like you're just some schmuck on an exercise bike, but you're just like looking around. I would not recommend running with a headset on. I have tried it. It's not good. Your balance is just way too off. I mean, I could potentially see there's like underwater treadmills where you're kind of more strapped in. I could kind of see that being interesting to put a headset on. But if you're just on a regular treadmill, like don't do it. Trust me, don't do it. I made that mistake and realized it was a mistake pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of cool stuff you can do with like motion and movement in VR. And again, I think we're like really right at the early stages. And I do think people are going to solve the problem where, yeah, you can run and be in VR, you can move around and be in VR. And, part of the challenge is you are so blocked out from the rest of the world. So, I've spent a lot of time in VR. The unglamorous part of what I do is like, if I'm doing a lot of demos, a huge chunk of it is just like grabbing people before they walk into a wall. Right. So, I do think we're going to see something where maybe it goes a little bit more towards AR in the sense that you're not so blocked out, right? Like you can see if you're going to walk into a wall or like, walk off bump into a chair or something. But yeah, it's definitely, I mean, a lot of the movement stuff in VR, again, it's new, but it's super, super exciting.
Awesome, Cortney. Thank you for all this VR talk. You got me much more excited, and I hope everybody else is getting more excited because it's still, like you said, developing technology, and I think it's going to get much, much better in the future. Go ahead and give a parting piece of guidance for people that is trying to get into the VR or want to work in that VR space, and then how we can connect with you.
So, okay, cool. So if you want to work in VR, I would say just like find VR pieces that you like. And find out who made them and email them or hit them up on social media. And more often than not, they're going to need help. Also, more often than not, there's probably not a lot of money there. But if you're willing to, do some sort of a deal or cut your rate or do something, there are a lot of opportunities. Again, no one's getting rich in VR right now, but it's pretty cool. So if people want to find me on social media, my personal accounts are all just my name, and that's Cortney Harding, Harding. So that's my Twitter is at Cortney Harding. My Instagram is at Cortney Harding. My personal website is Cortney-Harding.com. Friends with Holograms, it's friendswithholograms.com. And Hologram Friend is the Twitter handle. I could not get Friends with Holograms. It was too many characters, which was super annoying. And so, yeah, I mean, follow either or both of those. A lot of the content is similar because I'm still building the Friends with Holograms brand. If you happen to be someone that works at an ad agency, a brand, or an entertainment company, and you're just like a game dev in your spare time, hit me up. I'm happy to come and teach people about VR and bring my Rift and drag my Rift through an airport or on the subway. Or, I've taken that Rift everywhere. It's I need to get like little stickers, like travel stickers for my Rift case. And someone thought it was a hat box, which I found like incredibly amusing. So yeah, it's not a Hatbox. It's an Oculus Rift. But yeah, no, definitely. I'm happy to chat with anyone about VR. So feel free to hit me up.
Yes, hit her up, Game Dev. She's willing to help and teach you everything about VR. So Cortney, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. And for that, we are truly grateful. We look forward to your future work. And until then, we will catch you next time.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Game Devs, for listening, and remember that knowledge is only potential power, execution is the game. Go check out my website at gamedeveloper.com for all the show notes. If you want to listen to more inspiring stories, make sure to subscribe to the podcast. Until then, keep on making games, and I will see you on the next episode. Bye.